Welcome to What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. Andrew is president and CEO of Swan Capital. He has offices in Pensacola and then Mobile and Daphne, Alabama as well. Here to talk about retirement planning. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. Now today on our show, it's going to be a little bit different. Andrew has invited Pastor Chris Bell to join us. And Pastor Bell is senior pastor at Three Circle Church in Coastal Alabama. We're going to be discussing how to be generous and how to be willing to share our blessings that we have. That's going to be our focus today on What Your Money Would Say. First of all, let me give you the phone number. It's 800-848-8768. Again, 800-848-8768. Whenever you hear Andrew talking on our show, a lot of times you hear him talking about his swan planning process. It's something that he's designed to help retirees sleep well at night. That's his goal for you. And we'll be mentioning that today throughout our show, among a lot of other things. Here is the number again, 800-848-8768. And, of course, you can find us online anytime at swan-capital.com. I want to say a big hello to you, Andrew, and a big welcome to you, Pastor Bell.
Hi. Great to be with you guys today.
Thank you so much. And yes, Andrew, you've invited a very familiar pastor to you. And you've invited him because you want to focus on biblical stewardship. So tell us why this topic is so important to you.
Absolutely. I think it's a topic that needs to definitely be discussed from time to time. And people say, why on a money show about investing and keeping and gathering more assets are we talking about generosity? And I think we have to. I mean, I believe the Bible is as practical as well as spiritual, and Jesus was not silent on money. And we can learn a lot of sound financial principles from Jesus. I mean, if you look at biblical researchers have looked at this, that 1 out of 5 parables either discusses money or money is used as a part of the analogy and the parable. So I don't think Jesus was silent on money, and I don't think, me being diligent with the show, I should be silent on generosity either.
Right, and I love that we're bringing this to the forefront today. And I want to mention that not only are you a financial professional, but you're an author. And you've written 2 books, one in particular that addresses our subject today. So tell us about that.
Certainly. Tithe, A Living Testimony is my second book that is really relevant with today's show. And I really loved writing the book because I went through all the excuses that people are giving when they don't give generously. And I went through all of those different excuses, but it's also a book of encouragement. I give a lot of tangible ways that people can give more than a lot of times they even imagined. And so if you want to get a complimentary copy of this book, please go to our website or give us a call. And for the first 20 or so callers, we will send them a copy of the book. So we'd love to send you a copy.
All right, well, let me go ahead and just give you that phone number since we're talking about that. The number to call is 800-848-8768. Call for that complimentary book about tithing that Andrew wrote himself. 800-848-8768. And then, of course, Pastor Bell. So happy to have you on today. You're pastor of Three Circle Church. It's a church that has multiple locations. You happen to be at the Daphne campus, right?
Well, actually, I'm at the Fairhope campus. So what we would consider our broadcast campus is the Fairhope campus.
Okay.
And so that is where I'm kind of based. And then I teach live at the Daphne and Fairhope campuses. And then we simulcast the sermons to our other multi-site campuses.
Oh, my goodness. So You are a very busy pastor and a very busy church.
Yeah, we really are, but it's a good thing.
Of course it is. So tell us about some of the events you have coming up.
Yeah, well, right now, this time of year when we're recording this, Easter is right around the corner. So our Easter gatherings, we will actually be doing Easter gatherings all weekend. We do a thing called Tenebrae, which is our Good Friday services. It's a beautiful, historical, musical experience that we'll do on the Friday night at all of our campuses. And then Saturday and Sunday at our campuses, we will be doing gatherings and services. And so really excited. I think we'll be doing about 14 services on the Eastern Shore total and more at the other campuses. The easiest way to see that schedule is to go to 3 circlechurch.com, and our entire schedule is there for Easter. But that's really what we're getting ready for. We're finishing up. Right now we're teaching a series on the life of John the Baptist, which is really appropriate because he kind of led the way for Jesus to come onto the scene historically. And so he's kind of leading us into Easter, and we could not be more excited about the Easter season this year because a year ago, Easter was all digital. It was all online. And now, thankfully, we're able to carefully, with social distancing and other measures, we're able to actually have Easter in our campus building. So we're excited about that.
Now, what about coming up in May? Do you have anything, or April and May, anything?
Yeah. Well, after Easter, we'll be beginning a brand new teaching series on the book of Esther, which we're really excited about. It's an incredible, just epic story in the Old Testament where you see the invisible hand of a sovereign God working in this huge drama. And I think we all kind of see ourselves sometimes in a drama. All of our lives are like dramas. And we need to be reminded that God's sovereignty, his hand, is in our lives. Even when we don't see it working, we can trust that he is working. So that is going to be huge. We have lots of events for families and kids coming up that are just going to be amazing. And then we'll be going into summer, and summer will include camps for all of our kids. We do a thing called Camp 3 Circle that'll be happening in the month of June. And all that's on our website, but just a lot of things begin to happen for families after Easter. So we're really excited about all of that.
I love that. What is your website, by the way?
It is the number 3, so don't spell out the word 3.
Okay.
The number 3, the word circle, the word church.com. So 3circlechurch.com. Real easy to find out everything about us. We have an app. You can actually go to the App Store on your phone and get the 3 Circle app where you can find teaching, series, schedules, all of those things that we have going on. So, go check it out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. A lot of great
Absolutely.
stuff to check out there.
Yeah.
Now, Pastor Bill, I got to ask you this because, our topic today is on tithing. Is America
Right.
becoming more like and I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, but the Laodicean church?
Laodicean.
Laodicean.
Yes.
Laodicean.
Yeah. You know what? That's interesting. I think that when you look at those churches, and there's 7 of them in the book of Revelation, including the Laodiceans, I think that the reason those are there is that all of our churches probably at times have some of the traits of all of them. But the Laodicean church certainly had a money issue. But here's what you learn from that story in the entire Bible. The reason Jesus talked about money so much, the reason he talked about that church having a generosity problem, is because money is an indicator of our hearts. That's why it's so important. Jesus cared about our hearts. He said, above all else, guard your heart. So how do you guard your heart? Well, how do you know what's going on in your heart? And this is interesting. The Bible over and over and over again says that one of the great indicators, if you will, of what's going on in your heart is how you handle your money and how you see money and how you view money and how you treat money. And one of the great signs of a healthy heart is generosity. You just simply can't be generous without a healthy internal heart and spiritual life. So that's what we see. The Laodicean church had become non-generous, which said their hearts were in the wrong place.
I love that you said money is an indicator of our hearts. That is so true. And then, Andrew, you always see that from your perspective as a financial professional, people wanting to give their money to their churches and charities, don't you?
Absolutely. And sometimes we just need help to do it the most efficiently way possible. And one of the startling things that I tell clients on a regular basis is I say, stop giving to your church and charity. And I always see clients' eyes get really big and they say, what do you mean stop giving to my church or charity? I say, let me do it for you. If you're over the age of 70 and a half, you can do something that's called a QCD, a qualified charitable distribution, and send money directly from your IRA to your charity and get that tax deduction even if you don't itemize. Because right now, with the standard deduction being so high, it actually allows givers not to get a tax deduction. That's what's happening, and it's a real shame because QCDs are available for families that have an IRA and oftentimes are just not aware that they can do that. So if you want to learn more about QCDs and qualified charitable distributions, we have a CPA in office that can walk you through that strategy to make sure that you're getting the tax deduction that you deserve for your generosity. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. And what we like to do is go through a 1-hour complimentary visit with a family and look through their tax strategy, the estate planning strategy that really ties into their plans for giving, as well as their income plan for retirement. and give you an A plus, a B in some areas, or maybe even a C. And what's great is if you're 5 years out from retirement, wouldn't it be nice to know that you're prepared for retirement? And we can walk through that sleep study with you to make sure, because it's our goal to help every client sleep well at night. And that's what SWAN stands for. So give us a call to schedule that complimentary visit at 1-800-848-8768.
Swan-capital.com. That's another way you can check out Andrew Swan with a -capital.com. And thanks for listening. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair of Swan Capital. And, of course, joining us today is Pastor Chris Bell, and we're so happy to have him here. Pastor, let me ask you this. It seems like a lot of times people are annoyed when the subject of tithing comes up. Tell us what they're missing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the reason we're annoyed, again, is the reason Jesus talked about it so much, because, again, it's telling us what's going on inside of us. So it's like the check engine light on your car. It's letting you know there's something up. And so if I'm annoyed anytime someone talks to me about money, then it's telling me that I have something out of proportion there. So, and what they're missing, what they don't understand, is true joy is found when we are underneath the authority of God. When everything in our lives are underneath His authority, that is where the true joy can be found. Jesus called it the narrow gate and the wide gate. The wide gate looks like it would be more fun. It would be better. You can do whatever you want, including with your money. But the Scriptures teach us that actually the wide gate leads to destruction. Mm-hmm. And you know this from helping people, Andrew, plan and take care of their money. If you spend whatever you want on whatever you want, you end up financially in ruins.
Right.
Okay? But if you plan and you do the hard things and you're disciplined, it leads to great life. It leads to great opportunities to be generous. So Jesus teaches us that if we'll place our life, and that includes finances, underneath His authority, which would include generosity, include things like tithing, when we do that, it actually leads to a very abundant life. It sounds counterintuitive, right? Narrow would seem to lead to narrow. But no, Jesus says, no, the more narrow you are, in other words, underneath His authority, the more freedom you actually have.
And that sounds like a lot more freedom when I can give over my financial worries over to a God that can handle that. Absolutely. That is sovereign over those issues.
It's like a prison. When you are in a place where you're not financially able to do the things you need to do, it's like you're in a financial prison. And Jesus teaches us that when we place, and this is true of any area of our life, but maybe more so than many of the others, finances in particular, because it's so tied to our hearts. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there's your heart also. They're connected. And so when that comes underneath the umbrella of the authority of God, I find freedom and joy. I find great joy. So I would say that's what people are missing when they don't place their finances. And people will put their eternal destiny under God's authority. They'll put so many things under His authority, but they'll say, "Now I want to keep the money for me."
Right. I want you to say, I want to go to heaven, and I don't mind you telling me how to live my life. But when it comes to my money, that's a little different.
I'll trust God with everything else, but not my money. And so that there is a problem. Just that statement that we see lived out all the time is a huge indicator. It's like, look, if I put the thermometer to my head and it says that I have a 103 temperature,
something's wrong.
It's telling me something's going on.
Right.
Well, those financial indicators are telling me something about my spiritual life.
And we can see that if you look at America's spending habits. Here are the facts. The average American gives 2% or less of their income away to charity or their church. Right. And the average American only saves 6%, and they live on 92% for themselves. Yes. And we're not big enough reasons to live for. 92% of everything we make spent on ourselves is a recipe for disaster. Yep. And so what I talk about in the book I'm writing as we speak is the conscious Christian continuum, because I think once you wake up to this, that there's a better way of handling your money, and that is 10% at least as the floor to giving to the church, to a charity, but at least what I believe is to my church, and then 20% to savings. See, if you save 20%, everyone talks about how to make more money, how to make more return on our money, but it's all a symptom of the problem of not saving enough. If you save 20%, you can nearly brute force your way to retirement. Yeah. And then that leaves still a large 70% on yourself
To
and
live
your
on.
family.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so I think that is a lot more healthy of a balance. And that may be a narrow gate. And not everyone is willing to accept that narrow gate, but that is, I think, a better way.
Yeah, one of the analogies I love to use is that everyone wants to have a good body and be in shape, right? But to do that, you can't do what everyone else is doing. So when everyone's eating the ice cream, you're not. You're going to have to make some choices. When other people are sleeping in, you're going to the gym. So you got to decide what you want in life. And I think that's something you're talking about, the idea of margin. So for me to have margin in my life, I just simply can't be a consumer all the time and just buy whatever I want. And again, Jesus talked about it so much because of the way we spend our money. All of those things are telling us what we really treasure. What do we really love? Do I really love stuff and money? No one wants to admit that, by the way.
No.
I've been in ministry for over 20 years, and there's two things that people do not want you to tell them that they are. They don't want to admit they are, and that is greedy, right? And that is proud. They don't want to be told they're prideful, and they don't want to be told they're greedy.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
And it's because most of us, if we're not careful, are prideful and greedy.
Yeah. And all you have to do is check your calendar.
Right.
That's me, what I'm going to be doing for the next week, and then check my checking account.
No doubt. And most people think you have to be rich to be greedy.
No.
Not true. Not true.
Very good point.
Yep.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back. But, Andrew, let's give out your information right now.
Sure. To get a copy of our second book, we're going to give out copies to the first 10 callers. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768, and we'll send you a copy of my book signed, and I'll send it to you. 1-800-848-8768. And if you're driving, please don't rush over to the highway. You can always look it up on our website at swan-capital.com, and you can order a copy there as well. That's, again, swan-capital.com.
And we have lots more to get to, so stick around for more of What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. We're talking about biblical stewardship today. Now, Andrew, I want to ask you this. I've heard you say before that our storage units are full, but our hearts are empty. Tell us what that means.
Certainly. You know, I actually had the pleasure of living with my grandfather after my grandmother passed away. And he was 93 years old, full of wisdom, sharp as a tack when I lived with him. We were two bachelors living together, and it was such great insight because, here's a man that lived through the Great Depression, and, he, it really explained to me American history firsthand. And it was a really cool thing. And one of the things I took away from a financial standpoint is we talked about the Great Depression, how, the soup lines and the unemployment lines were around the block, and people were scared financially, but they still gave nearly 3% of their income. And we talked about how 100 years of progressive economic improvement, where now we have a 2-household income family, which back in his day wasn't the case. And actually, incomes have outpaced inflation. Many people think that it's the opposite. No, incomes have outpaced inflation. And the difference is we're more wealthy than ever in the greatest expansion, but we are giving less than the Great Depression. We're only giving 2% or less sometimes of our income. And so it's sad that America has got richer, but we've become less generous over time. And I think that is something that I definitely want to talk about more in the show.
Okay, so you said that now Americans are giving about 2%, right? Isn't that what
Correct.
you
We're giving
about
away
2%?
less.
Yeah, less. So, Pastor Bell, you joined Three Circle Church back in 2012. You have a beautiful family. You have a wife and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. So, you have a family, and I know you've worked with families over these years. Tell us what we can learn about being a giving generation from the Bible.
Yeah, well, I think the Bible's real clear that in order to give, and we just know this from the numbers, that you have to have margin to be able to give. And the Bible is clear that we should not use everything on us. It's just real clear that it should not be about us. And I think what we find is that we are consumers. As our wealth has grown, our consumeristic behaviors have grown exponentially with it and really have outpaced it. That's why people go into tremendous debt, because we just buy and buy and buy. And so what I find is I find the 25-year-old newlywed couple where the guy's driving a $50,000 truck and the girl's driving a $40,000 car, and they've got and it's like, what are we doing here? So much debt to keep up with this idea of what the American dream looks like. Well, when you are that maxed out, you cannot give.
Right.
So again, the fact that a couple can't give is telling me then you're spending too much. If you can't be generous, then you have become too much of a consumer.
And look at the first century church. I mean, they had margin. They were able to sell their possessions and sell things to support ministry, to support the gospel.
Absolutely. They were willing to do that. They were willing to make, and they were joyful,
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. I think we have decided in America that to buy something and to purchase something equals joy. And the scriptures warn us about that life is about more than things. Jesus said, life's more about your clothing, your food, and your shelter. It's more than that. And don't we all know this? Haven't we all bought the car that we thought, if I could just get this car, and then a week later we're like, this thing just gets me from point A to point B.
And then thinking, when I get that, then I'll be happier.
Yes, and there's a story. Jesus told a parable about the guy with the barns.
Right.
And it's called bigger barn syndrome. Instead of giving, he just built bigger barns to put more stuff in it. Exactly what you were talking about earlier. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And it's so true, because buying gives you joy, immediate joy, and then you're over it, and
Exactly.
you're on to the next
Isn't what
thing.
we teach our kids.
Yeah.
I tell my church all the time, adults are just kids with more expensive toys.
With
Bigger
money.
wallets.
That's all we
Exactly.
got,
Bigger
more
toys.
expensive toys. And we act, so the problem is, though, we shouldn't keep acting like that.
No.
But yet we have 40-year-olds acting like middle schoolers when it comes to our finances. But we have all sorts of ways to excuse that when we wouldn't excuse it in our own children. But yet many of us act like children in our finances. No margin, overspending, buying what we need. It's like microwaving our food. When everyone knows nothing good comes out of a microwave except popcorn, right? But what is good when you put it in a crock pot? If it's cooked all day, whatever that is going to be good.
Time.
Well, we have a microwave mentality when it comes to our finances and our things and our possessions. We want it now, instant gratification, but we learn from the Bible that the long view and being smart and wise is what leads to joy and freedom.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's even a commercial. I want it, and I want it now.
Now.
Yeah.
That's it.
My
That's
money.
exactly right.
Yeah.
We use another statement that's helpful. We say, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
There
Exactly.
you go.
When it comes to your finances. And people do that. They walk into a car dealership and they go, how much can I afford?
Right. Or
per
the
month?
mortgage. How about a mortgage? They think the loan officer's their friend.
Oh, yeah.
They'll give you the shovel to bury yourself with if you want.
Exactly. And so the question should not be, what can I do? The question should be, what should I do? What's the wise thing to do? And the what should I do and what is the wise thing creates margin.
Exactly.
The what can I do puts us right on the edge and often shoves us right over the edge.
So, Andrew, it sounds like the early church did have a different operating system, right?
They did. They have a different formula of living their lives. And we talked about this, about giving God the control, which equals freedom, which is counterintuitive. But here's the formula. Financial worries equals you in charge divided by the time it takes you to figure out that you're not in charge. Versus the early church had financial confidence, and financial confidence equals God in charge divided by the time it takes him to work out his purpose in your life. And I think if we can go with giving over control to say, God can be over control over my finances, and that starts with that conscious Christian continuum where we give 10% to God and say, the first fruits of my money is going to God. 20% I'm going to actually invest in our family, in our future. And then the 70% is the margin left over to spend on everything I want. And everyone talks about a budget, Chris, and this is controversial. I don't believe a budget's necessary. If you give 10% and you save 20%, it doesn't really matter what you spend the 70% on because you have your priorities done correctly. And that is an altogether operating system that's different than what culture is telling us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the example of the New Testament, too, people will say to me sometimes, well, does the New Testament really say we should give 10%? And my answer to them is no, it doesn't. It says to give far more.
Right.
The radical generosity of the early church is interesting because the Old Testament was built on law and numbers. And yeah, it was very specific. The New Testament explodes all of that into radical generosity
Because of grace.
because of grace, and because
Grace
of what
doesn't
Jesus
lower
has
the
done
bar,
for us.
raises it.
Yeah. So the question is, so it becomes about the heart again. Jesus doesn't need our money. He has everything. He wants us to understand that our hearts are so very important. Look, if I coach my kids in ball, and if I tell the kids on my baseball team, hey, I want you to get up every morning and to be good at this and be good at this team, I want you to hit 20 balls every morning and run a mile. That's law. I don't have their hearts. I'm just telling them, here's what to do. But if I look at them and say, hey, I want you to love this team so much that then you go and do what it's going to take to be a part of this team you love so much. Well, I think that's going to become far more than...
That's going to be a strong team, too.
Right. Well, that's what we have in the New Testament. In the New Testament, God looks at his people and he says, I want radical generosity. I've given my son for you. Now go be generous. And what we see in the book of Acts is the New Testament church just decided, you know what? We'll give it all away. It was radical.
Reverse tithing.
It was reverse tithing. Absolutely.
So it sounds like you have it pretty well established that we tithe 10%, we save 20%, and that's how we're going to end up having a good, strong retirement is if we save 20%. Sounds pretty simple, Andrew.
It does. It sounds simple, but it's hard to do. And what we come alongside families that are 5 years from retirement, and what we start off with is a cash flow sheet. Now, you might have heard me just say, Andrew, I thought you said budgets are outdated and controversial, that we shouldn't have them. That's true. But when it comes to retirement, you need to look at what you have and spend on today versus what you're going to be spending on when you retire and compare the two. And we try to make that process very simple by having a one-page cash flow sheet. And when we sit down with a family during our Swan Sleep Study, is we make sure that they know how much income they're going to need in retirement, because you get used to 30 years of or 40 years of paychecks. And when you retire, those paychecks end, and you have to know exactly what you need, and you need to know where that income source is going to come from. And we can help you with all the income planning necessary before you retire. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768, and we will make sure that your income plan has you on track to retire the way you and your family have dreamed of. Again, that's 1-800-848-8768.
And don't forget to ask for the book, Tithe, a Living Testimony, that Andrew has written. It's complimentary. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. And today we're talking about biblical stewardship. We have Andrew's special guest, Pastor Chris Bell. He's senior pastor at Three Circle Church on the Eastern Shore. And Pastor, your church supports a lot of missions here at home and then also around the world. So you do know firsthand how resources from tithing are used. Why is it so important that we tithe?
Yeah, well, for one, it is the vehicle that God has ordained in Scripture, not only to make sure that our hearts are where they need to be, but also to further the work of the kingdom. So God, in his sovereignty, now he could have done it a million different ways, but God in his sovereignty decided that the vehicle resource-wise for the furthering of the kingdom of God across the world would be his people, the resources and the generosity of his people. We see that in the New Testament. We see that as Paul and all of these guys were taking their missionary journeys and starting these churches, that there was, in the beginning, it was the Jerusalem church that was financing most of it. And then you see later on that the outside churches started helping Jerusalem. It was generosity going back and forth. So this isn't a new concept. And so that's why it's so important that we give, because God ordained. I think most of us decide that everything we have belongs to us, and we're going to give some of it to God. The scriptures are clear. It all belongs, and this is huge. It's a different mentality. Everything belongs to God if I'm a Christian. Everything, I just handed it to him, and I get to keep, by God's grace, he says, you get to keep this, you get to use this, but you're going to give this to my work, my kingdom. And the Bible says when we do that first, put first the kingdom of God, all these other things will be added to us. It is a prioritization that then leads to a balanced life, including our finances.
And Chris, earlier you said that we're just adult kids, that we spend our money like children do and handle our money like we children do. And if you think about it like this, when it comes to giving and why I'm so passionate about talking about it, is it's the Play-Doh test. Again, the teacher, when I was in school, would give me the Play-Doh, and I would play with it, and I'd squish my hands through it. But the harder I squished that Play-Doh, the more it came out of my fingers.
Yeah.
And what I see, especially from my side of the table, dealing with families and their finances, is if we are possessed by our possessions and we continually just actually grip onto our things, those things start to grip onto us.
Totally.
And that strengthens our margin that we're not able to give to mission work. We see that the unreached people groups, that there's 7,000 plus unreached people groups that haven't ever heard the name Jesus. And we say, I'd like to give towards that.
Right.
I would like to give towards that, but I have all these things, all this Play-Doh that I don't want to let go of. And if we're not careful, if God is a good God and disciplines, he's the keeper of all Play-Doh. He can say, I will pry every finger away from your Play-Doh if necessary, because that's a Father that cares about us.
No doubt about it. I mean, we like to say at Three Circle that God is the God who always comforts the afflicted, and he will afflict the comfortable. Okay, he will do that in our lives if we hold on to things too tightly. And I think that's the thing. We're addicted to comfort, and that never leads to a good place. We like to say about money, and I believe the Bible teaches this, that we shouldn't love our money, we shouldn't trust our money, and we also shouldn't waste it. So we trust in the Lord, not in our money. We love God and love people, not money, and we don't waste money. We treat it with great value and care. But what happens is when we get those priorities out of line, listen, if you love money, you will use people every time. And the Bible is clear we should love people, use money as a tool.
Right.
Well, if I love the people of the world and I want to see Jesus glorified and people saved, then I will use money as a tool to resource that. But if I am totally leveraged to the max with my finances, I can't give. So to your point, and you're helping people do this with what you do, you're helping people ultimately be able to be a part of the work of God. That's huge.
And to do it more efficiently. So if you're listening to our show today, we're talking about tithing and biblical stewardship. And I want to share with you a little known tax strategy that sadly is underused, and that's QCDs, Qualified Charitable Distributions. If you have money in an IRA, a 401k, those assets have never been taxed. It's like frozen income. And as you know, as you're 72 years old, you'll have to be forced to start taking money out of those accounts. And then what I see clients do all the time, sadly, Chris, is they'll take money out of their IRAs, pay the taxes, and turn around and give it to their church or charity. And I say, stop. Don't do that. Let me send the money directly from your IRA to your favorite church and charity. And what will happen is you'll pay no taxes, even if you don't itemize up to $100,000 a year you can do a QCD for and pay zero taxes.
It's amazing.
And so if you've never heard about that strategy and want to learn more, we have a CPA in our wealth management firm that can explain and unpack that strategy and see if it's a good fit for you. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768.
We'll be right back with more of Andrew McNair and Pastor Chris Bell coming up next on What Your Money Would Say. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. I'm Luann Fulmer. And at Swan Capital, they are financial professionals who focus on retirement. That is what our show is always about. And Andrew, of course, has the experience and the knowledge to help you live well in retirement. Now, today, we have a very special guest on our show. We're talking with Chris Bell. He's senior pastor at Three Circle Church here on the Eastern Shore. So, Pastor Bell, tell us about your services. Are they on Sunday only, or are they on Saturdays as well?
Yeah, our normal weekend gatherings and services are on Sundays only. We're multiple services and multiple campuses. So we're in Thomasville, Mobile, Daphne, and Fairhope, Alabama. And then we are online during the same times of those gatherings. And then we have online on demand. So at any time during the week, you can tune in to Three Circle Church and join one of our gatherings. So just about any time you want to log in to our website, you can be a part of one of those gatherings.
That's wonderful. Really, it's just like if someone's away on the weekend, then they can just come home and tune in.
You can catch up on a teaching series if you want to, or you can even browse our teaching series by topic and find something that maybe you're interested in. So hopefully there's a lot of resources to help people there.
Yeah, sounds like there are. Tell us about some of your upcoming events.
Yeah, well, just the main thing that we have would be family-centered events that are coming up, and there's so many of them, it's hard to just kind of list them out. But the best way to do that is to go to threecirclechurch.com. There, all of our events are there, but we have Camp 3 Circle coming up in June for people across the Gulf Coast to get their kids involved. It's a huge event at all of our campuses. So whether you're in Mobile or Thomasville or Daphne or Fairhope, you can get your kid to one of those. It's going to be an incredible experience for kids in our area. And then our student activities, which is from 5th grade through seniors in high school. Every Wednesday night, we have an incredible atmosphere at Three Circle Church campuses for those age groups. So it's just an incredible place to be if you have kids and if you're a family. Really.
Yes. Sounds like a wonderful place to serve and to worship. So
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Now, I want to ask you this question because we're talking about tithing today on our show and how to be a blessing to others with what we have. Can someone pave their way into heaven by what they do with their money here on earth?
No. Absolutely not. The Bible is really clear that the only way to heaven is through Jesus. It's not what we do. The book of Ephesians says that it's not by works that we're saved, it's by faith and grace. But here's what money does do. Money is an indicator of the authenticity of your faith. It's one of many. So what the Bible's clear about is that we don't work our way into heaven. But if we have a relationship with Jesus, there will be signs. I grew up, Andrew, on a farm in Mississippi. And we had cows, and you didn't have to see the cows to know that they were there.
Right.
You following me? There was evidence everywhere.
You might step in it.
That's right. That's right. So you go, oh, there's cows here, and a lot of them. Right?
Yeah.
This is clear in the Bible. If you are really a person of faith in Jesus, and he has transformed your life, there will be evidence. There's no such thing as a Christian with no evidence of it. The Bible's clear. And one of those great evidences of authentic faith is financial generosity. It's why Jesus talked about it as much as he did. It is one of the great indicators. Others would be love. Others would be forgiving. Those other things that come, mercy, those things that come out of a Christian when they are rooted in Christ. But there is no mistaking the fact that a Christian will become generous if they are truly following Christ.
And when Jesus showed up on the scene, I mean, it was very controversial what he was talking about on the Sermon on the Mount, because at the time, all the religious leaders of the day were saying, well, if you're wealthy, you're blessed. That's right. I mean, and God is really shining his blessing on you. And Jesus was like, no, there's this Christian paradox at work that says, in Luke 6:24 that we see, but woe to you who are rich, for you've already received your comfort. And so as true Christians, what we should be doing is saying, hey, I'm only going to live at best 100-year lifetime. Do I want to live wealthy with comfort for that 100 years? Or can I can't pave a way to heaven, but can I invest my money into a future kingdom, into that eternal kingdom, and actually have wealth, eternal riches forever?
Yes.
And so you have to say, am I going to have all the comfort now? Or what about comfort for the rest of eternity?
Yeah.
For others, so that they hear the gospel. And I think, no,
Absolutely.
You can't pave your way to heaven, but you can sure help others find it.
No doubt
with
about
money.
it. Yeah, and so our giving and our generosity is not to get us into a right relationship with God. Our giving and our generosity is a result of our good relationship with God. So I just can't look. God is the greatest giver. You can't be like him without giving. It's just part of being a Christian. The Bible, when it describes Jesus, it says God gave his only son. He's the greatest giver of all time. So if I'm going to be like my Heavenly Father, then I must be a giver.
Right.
I must be generous.
Wow. I love that. That's so good. And Andrew, you wrote a book about tithing, a living testimony. You're giving that away today on our show. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. If I'm going to talk about money, 24 hours a day, it seems, I love talking about money, but I also like to talk about giving even more. And that has to do with giving. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my second book, Tithe, the Living Testimony. As we're leading up, when we're recording this, leading up to Easter Sunday, what we want to do is make sure that you get a copy of this book. And to get a copy of this book, all you have to do is call 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768. Or you can go online if you're driving and you can't take that on that number, and you can order a copy of the book on our website at swan-capital.com.
Swan-capital.com. You can find some great information there about Andrew and his team at Swan Capital. And we're just so happy to have you join us today. You're listening to What Your Money Would Say. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. Today, Andrew and I are discussing biblical stewardship with Pastor Bell of Three Circle Church here on the Eastern Shore. Pastor, I want to ask you this. How can we balance being comfortable yet obedient with our money?
That's a great question. You know, I think we need to see ourselves as managers rather than owners when it comes to what God has given us. The Bible does not say that poverty is the thing we're aiming at either. So I think there's this idea that that maybe there's we think rich is bad and prosperity is bad. So we're going to turn the gospel into the poverty gospel. Neither one of those is true. We're not to be all about being rich. We're also not to be all about being poor. No, what we are to do is to be obedient. And in our obedience, sometimes that does lead. There will be some who will be wealthy. The Bible's clear about that. But some will not be. But you know what? You don't have to be wealthy in the terms of this world, like a big bank account, to be generous. That's the beauty of tithing. And you talk about the beauty of percentages is that
it's relative.
Is relative. That's why Jesus told the story about the woman who came and
the widow's mite.
What she gave was far more generous than what the rich guys were throwing in, right? So the question is not, what's the number on the paper that you gave? The question is, were you obedient and generous in what you gave? So there's the Bible's clear. There's no problem in you enjoying this life. Jesus said, I came to bring life and life more abundantly. So generosity is not this dichotomy where in order to be generous, I have to live like a pauper. That's not the idea of Scripture at all. If we got a problem with rich guys, then we got to pull Abraham, David, all those guys that leave the Bible. Yeah. They were well. Joseph of Arimathea, Jesus had a place to be buried because there was a rich dude that followed him.
That's right.
And had the money to buy the tomb. Okay, so that is not the issue, and I think there's been way too much often in church of shaming the rich. And sometimes almost romanticizing the idea of poverty. Both are wrong.
Right.
Both are wrong. So I think what we need to do, though, is whether I'm rich or whether I don't have a lot by the world standards, the question is obedience. And obedience is relative to all of us. It is applicable to all of us equally. Am I being obedient? And obedience to Christ requires generosity.
Since we're on the subject of tithing, let's talk about how tithing can be a tax deduction.
Certainly. One of the best ways, even if you don't itemize, because a lot of people listening say, Andrew, I used to get a tax deduction for giving, but with the standard deduction being so high, I don't get any deduction for it. Well, there is a way, and it's called a QCD, a Qualified Charitable Deduction, where you can take money directly from an IRA and send it to your church and charity, and you can get the tax deduction as if you itemized, which is really cool that you'll pay no taxes on the money that you saved up within an IRA. But I also want to share with you another tax strategy, and that's called a Roth IRA conversion. We know that potentially tax rates are going to go higher, and I'll just echo what Jesus said: is pay to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. But we also don't want to give them a tip if it's unnecessary. We don't have to do that. And right now, tax rates are historically low, and we can pay to Caesar what he is owed right now while taxes are low. And what we help families do that many times thought they could not add money to a Roth IRA because they're retired. They thought they had to have earned income. They only thought that they could put $7,000 in a Roth. And we show families how they can move $50,000, $80,000 a year to a Roth. And that's all because of tax strategy. And again, if you have just, a CPA is a really good person to have on your team, but if they're only focused on tax refunds, then you want to say, what tax strategies am I missing? And that's why we have a CPA in our office to help with those tax strategies. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768. That's 1-800-848-8768.
We will be right back with the rest of our show. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair and our special guest, Pastor Chris Bell. This is What Your Money Would Say with Andrew McNair. I'm Lou Ann Fulmer. And for 15 years now, Andrew and his team at Swan Capital have been working with people just like you, helping them come up with financial strategies to get them to and through retirement. Today, we're having a great time talking about biblical stewardship with Andrew's pastor, Chris Bell. And he's senior pastor at Three Circle Church in Eastern Shore. Now, Andrew, I want to bring this up to you. Billy Graham, he always said some awesome things. Here's one quote from him. If a person gets his attitude toward money straight, then it will help straighten out almost every other area of his life. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think radical generosity requires sometimes radical revisions. And to create margin in someone's life, sometimes we have to go back to the basics of our finances and say, all right, what is my income situation and expenses look like? We know that the average American situation says that they are only giving 2% to churches and charities. The average American's only saving 6%, and we're wondering why there's a big epidemic about retirement savings, because they're only saving 6%. And then they're living on 92% for themselves. And that's why we've seen, I believe, a huge increase in anxiety and depression, because people are not a big enough reason to live for. Yourself, you incorporate is not a big enough reason to live for. But a radical revision and radical generosity looks more like 10% first fruits to God. And that's the floor, 10% minimally, 20% saving for you and your family's future. And then the remaining 70% is all yours. And you can spend that however you need to. A budget isn't required if you get your priorities correct from the start.
I love that. I just think it's simple. That's the simple math. Tithe 10%, save 20%, and then 70%, that's a lot to live on. Now, you wrote the book, Tithe, A Living Testimony, and you talk about excuses for people not tithing, okay? And we're giving away that copy today, but tell us about that, please.
Absolutely. Tithe, the Living Testimony is the second book I wrote, and I really explored all the excuses that people give for not tithing and the reasons why they don't believe to give and be generous to their church and charity. And I talked about through all of those excuses, the reasons why some of those excuses are generated. And then it's a really encouraging book because I give you a lot of tangible ways that you can start tithing more than you ever believed you possibly could by just tweaking your finances in various ways. So Tithe, the Living Testimony, and we're giving away a complimentary copy for the first 10 callers to give them a signed copy of Tithe, the Living Testimony. So you don't want to miss that. If you don't call or don't have time, go to our website at swan-capital.com, and you can also order a copy there as well.
Awesome. Hey, Pastor Bell, why are excuses to not tithe such a big deal?
Well, they're a big deal because of what they tell us about ourselves. Those excuses are really letting us know something is out of line inside of us. The famous story in the Bible is when Jesus met the rich young ruler. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because he's the only one, maybe Zacchaeus, the guy who had taken a lot of people's money, but this is really the only rich guy that Jesus ever said, give away everything you have. And the reason he did, because he was around other rich people. Why this guy? Because the rich young ruler, clearly his stuff had him. Mm. He didn't have stuff. His stuff had him. And it was clear because when Jesus said, oh, you want to follow me? Well, just give away everything you have. You can follow me, because that was the thing holding him back. So what I would say is that when people make excuses to not be generous as Christians, we are dangerously close to acting like the rich young ruler.
Yes.
We're saying, yeah, we'll follow you, Jesus, except this area of our lives.
Right.
And whatever it is, by the way, it's not money. Some people, money is not the thing that holds them back. Some people, it's overeating. Some people, it is materialism, not just in a money sense, but just collecting or whatever it may be. Sometimes it's relational. But for the rich young ruler, and for many people, who I bet, who are tuning in today, it is the money thing. They just simply can't hold it with an open hand and be generous. Mm-hmm. And when that is the case, Jesus loves us enough to break that in us. And that's what he did for the rich young ruler. That's what he'll do for us, Andrew.
And it's for our own good. But that's what I love. It's for our own hearts.
Absolutely. It's the most loving thing he can do for us. It really is. The most loving thing I could do for my kids when they were young was to tell them, do not go on the road. If you go play in the road, you're going to get hurt. You may lose your life. It wasn't that I was trying to limit them. I was trying to protect them. Jesus was trying to save the rich young ruler.
And truly, he was asking him to give up his earthly treasure to trade it for something eternally more valuable.
Absolutely. And the Bible says Jesus was saddened when he walked away. And I believe he is saddened when he sees us buy into a cultural identity for ourselves that is not biblical. When we measure our self-worth by our current earthly net worth instead of by what Christ has done for us, Well, Jesus is saddened. His heart breaks when our hearts are out of rhythm. And nothing indicates a heart out of rhythm more than the way we handle our resources and our money.
And then later on, we see Zacchaeus, who voluntarily gives away half of his possessions, and he's excited. He's
and why
joyous.
do you think it is? Because his heart changed. What happened to him outwardly is an indicator that his faith was authentic. You got two guys, both are rich. Both probably did some wrong things to get there, right? But the rich young ruler did not give his life to Jesus. He walked away. His heart hadn't changed. That's why he couldn't give it up. Zacchaeus gives his heart to Jesus, and the first indicator you get, the first sign is, I'll give everything I have away.
Yeah.
I have you now. That's why generosity is just so important.
Today we're talking about how to be generous and willing to tithe. And I think that's something we need to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. How do you suggest we do that, Pastor Bell?
Well, I think that oftentimes we believe that the biggest thing we can leave to the next generation, the thing we give them in our legacy, is stuff and money and property. The number one thing we can do is give them an attitude and a biblical view of money and generosity. And that's exactly what the Bible tells us in 1 Timothy. It tells us, watch out and teach the next generation to not place its hope in money, its hope in things, but instead give them a new way of looking at what rich really means. And the Bible's clear that rich is more than money. Rich is more than that. We find our greatest richness in our generosity. And so that's the biggest thing I can lead to my kids. Not a bunch of money, but how to actually view money in a biblical way.
Exactly. And a Barna study actually proved this. The apple, when it comes to generosity, doesn't fall far from the tree. Sometimes your kids and grandkids won't do exactly all the decisions that you want. But if you, as an example, show them generosity and you teach them generosity, it's been proven that the people that are most generous today, it's because of their parents and grandparents, that they sit on top of those shoulders. And so we want to train up a generous generation, because we have already talked about on today's show that unfortunately America is becoming less generous over time, and we want to change that tide.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for today. So, Pastor Bell, thank you so much for joining us.
To get a copy of my second book, Tithe the Living Testimony, for the first 10 callers, we're giving away a complimentary copy of that book. So give us a call at 1-800-848-8768, and we'll be happy to send you a copy. Again, I'm Andrew McNair, and I want to thank you for listening to What Your Money Would Say. Join us next week as we help you unravel the right things that you need to do for a successful retirement. Again, our phone number is 1-800-848-8768.